Well, my clock says 10:01, so we will get the webinar started. Hello, I'm Dan Nicky of the Iowa Waste Reduction Center located at the University of Northern Iowa. I will be your host today. The IWRC is hosting this webinar in partnership with the Iowa Association for Energy Efficiency. I am now going to have Jeff Gorey talk a little bit about the Iowa Association for Energy Efficiency. He is from the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities. Jeff, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. Hey, everyone, Jeff Gorey here. IAEE is a member-based volunteer-run organization that exists to promote the art and science of efficiency. I'm a proud member, and the organization has been around for 35 years. The organization basically exists to inform the public, institutions, governments, and individuals, and to raise the level of awareness and understanding for energy efficiency. Each year we host around 8 webinars over the course of the year. We host the Iowa Energy Summit, which happens at Prairie Meadows Convention Center and has over 200 participants. Dan, I think this year I felt like we had 300, but membership is a great value for me personally, because I get a ton of benefit out of being a member of AEE. I get a discount at all of the events. I get these informational webinars. The organization also organizes site visits to businesses in town and in the state to observe energy and equipment. We have a scholarship program, and there's also a number of newsletters that go out each year. Considering becoming a member of IAEE, I would highly encourage it. Individual memberships are only $75. Corporate memberships are $250, and they allow you to have every member of your organization be a member of IAEE. So it's an incredible value if you're considering it. The link I just posted in the chat to join IAEE. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to Dan or myself. Thanks, Dan, and happy to be here.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's Energy Assistance webinar. This webinar is funded in part through a grant from the Iowa Economic Development Authority's Energy Program. Today's webinar will be on the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on the energy industry, presented by Jacob Goldman, the Chief Engineer and Vice President of Energy Tax Savers. Mr. Goldman has a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering. Mr. Goldman has a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Buffalo and an MBA from the University of Maine. A full bio can be found on our webinar's web page at iwrc.org. Some brief housekeeping items. All participants are on mute today. The speakers will have control of his presentation. Participants will have the opportunity to ask questions through the question and answer feature on Zoom, not the chat feature. The reason for this is all questions in the question and answer section will be then recorded. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website in a couple of days. All slides will be available to participants in about a week. An evaluation will be sent to you later today for you to complete. So again, during the questions, please put them in the question and answer feature. I will be monitoring that feature. And when I see a question come up, I will read that question to Jacob and have him ask that question. So Jacob, at this time, I'm going to turn the controls over to you and you can get into your great presentation.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to present. And as you mentioned, I'm going to be presenting on the implications of the Inflation Reduction Act to the energy industry. With that, we're going to first cover enhancements to the alternative energy credits. Some people call them the ITC, some people, meaning investment tax credits, some people call them Section 48. But those are the items that I'll be talking about. So this is strictly for commercial side of the world, no residential type discussion as far as Inflation Reduction Act enhancements. It'll just be ITC, which is also called Section 48. We'll briefly talk about what's called 5-year makers and bonus depreciation, which will dovetail right into time value of money. We'll talk about traditional 179D, which is a tax incentive for putting in energy efficiency in buildings. And then we'll talk about how the Inflation Reduction Act enhanced that traditional 179D. And lastly, and it'll become clear as the presentation goes along, we'll briefly talk about apprenticeships and apprenticeship requirements because of those requirements. And with that, I'm going to get right into it. So this is not all the ITC credits. This is just a sampling. Mainly, these are the ones that are related to buildings. For example, wind is not on this list. What else is not on this list? There's now an incentive in Section 48 related to glass, where the glass changes its reflectivity because of temperature or because of an electrical signal. That glass can also qualify for these same incentives. But I'm focusing on some of the ones that we see the most of. And you'll also see that I have 3 of them in bold. So ground source heat pump, CHP, and thermal storage are all in bold. The reason they're in bold is they qualify. This is one of those times where you get to double dip because they qualified for both the alternative energy credits, these ITC credits, and they also qualify for 179D. Now, for those of you that do solar and know about solar, you would probably be aware that traditionally the solar credit was 30%. Then it got reduced over time. I think it was maybe down to 28 or 26%. It's a popular misnomer that this credit increases the credit from the past. That's not 100% accurate. In a lot of cases it does, but in actuality, it first lowers the credit. It actually lowers the credit down to a 6% credit. So for most technologies, the base credit, what they call the base credit, is now 6%. For micro turbines, unfortunately, it's 2%. They didn't get their lobbying group out there to get the 6%, but for most technologies, it's 6%. Now, if you were doing ground source heat pump or CHP, the drop is 10% down to 6%. But solar, it's in the 30 range down to 6 now. But what they did is they added a whole bunch of ways to qualify for bonuses. So there's a bunch of bonuses. And so if you're in solar or wind, for example, all those bonuses could get you up to a 70% tax credit, meaning where in the old days you might have been able to get a 30% credit. If you put your solar with the right equipment, with the right installers, in the right location on the planet, on the right type of building, you could possibly get a 70% credit. That's like a 70% off coupon for solar. The other technologies can go up to 50%. It's only solar and wind that can go up to the 70%. And so we're going to talk about the different bonuses that are available. We're going to talk about, all the different techniques to qualify. But before we get into that, what we're going to do here is talk about 2 sections of the Inflation Reduction Act that are just, these 2 sections, Section 6418 and Section 6417, these 2 sections are what's going to really drive the industry to more alternative energy. And they're very interesting legislation, and it's unbelievable that they got passed. And now that they're passed, it's really going to drive the adoption of these alternative energies. So the first one, 6418, this is for projects placed in service in 2023. So it only starts for things that are going to be placed in service in 2023. You could start the project before that, but it has to be placed in service in 2023. And what this 6418 allows, and this is the first time it's been allowed for alternative energy, is a company that is a commercial company that pays taxes might not have enough tax capacity to benefit from a credit. And so what they're going to be able to do is they're now going to be able to transfer those credits. They're going to be able to sell those credits to another company that will be able to, that has a larger tax capacity. Now, we've seen this in the film industry in different states. So different states have a film credit that's transferable. And what we see is that those credits usually sell for 70 cents to 95 cents on the dollar. So we expect alternative energy will be in the same category in that if you don't have enough tax capacity to take advantage of the credit, you can still do the project and you can sell your credit to somebody for 70 cents to 95 cents on the dollar. One big type of entity that's going to take advantage of this are REITs, real estate investment trusts. They own a lot of property in this country. A lot of the malls, for example, are owned by REITs. Simon Properties is a REIT. I don't know if you've heard of Kimco. Kimco owns a lot of shopping plazas. They're a REIT. There's a number of different REITs out there, and typically they couldn't benefit from tax credits. If they wanted to benefit, they would have to do a PPA and a tax equity, an LLC that own the property, and then they sell the energy to the REIT, for example. Now they directly can sell these credits. And so we think this is going to drive the introduction of alternative energy even further with the ability of selling these incentives.
Jacob, I've got a quick question.
Sure.
Will you be covering any residential incentives, or is this all going to be commercial?
This is all commercial.
Okay.
Not
That's
going to
fine.
be covering residential.
And just one other thing, Jacob, you might want to be careful about using too many acronyms because some people may not know all the tax lingo that you're so used to.
Sure. So yeah, REIT is real estate investment trust. They're a type of entity that owns a lot of property in this country. Section 6417 may be even more interesting than Section 6418. For the very first time, not-for-profits are going to directly get a tax credit. Now you're wondering, you're scratching your head like I am. How does a not-for-profit that doesn't pay taxes get this tax credit? Well, we don't know the answer to that, but IRS is going to create a technique for not-for-profits to directly get this tax credit. So there's going to be some form that the not-for-profit is going to file, and after they file that form, after they did their ground source heat pump project or solar project, the Treasury IRS is going to send them a check in the same amount, these same credits right here that we were just talking about. Not for profits, what we're talking about is private universities, parochial schools. 50% of hospitals in the country are not for profit. All those entities for the very first time are going to directly be able to get these tax credits. And sometimes I feel like I'm on an infomercial, but wait, there's more. So what's the more? State and political subdivisions thereof are also going to be able to directly get this tax credit. So what does that mean? That means state universities, prisons, office buildings, the Department of Transportation, on the local side, that's a political subdivision of the state. We're talking about K through 12 public schools, town halls, all those entities through 6417 are going to be able to get a direct tax credit. And there's some other organizations, Tennessee Valley Authority, Indian Tribal Government, Alaska Native corporations, cooperative energy co-ops. All of those entities will now directly get these tax credits. They do not have to create an LLC with a power purchase agreement, PPA, power purchase agreement. They're not going to, LLC is limited liability corporation. They're not going to have to create all these weird ways to take advantage. They're going to directly be able to get these tax credits. So for the very first time, not-for-profits and state and local, and please note, not federal. So if you're working on a federal project, there's not going to be a tax credit for you. But if it's state or local, they can directly get the tax credit. If it's a taxpayer that doesn't have a lot of tax capacity, they can sell it. So 6418 allows tax-paying entities to sell their credit. 6417 is for those non-tax-paying entities like not-for-profits that will directly get this benefit. So it's unbelievable legislation, and it's really going to blow out the adoption of alternative energy products because these entities that couldn't usually benefit are now going to be able to benefit.
Jake, I've got another question. Can electric / telephone cooperatives benefit in some way from these credits? And I'd like to remind all participants to please use the question and answer feature to ask questions?
So I don't know. Typically, every entity fits into one of these two buckets. The one that you're talking about, there is this section 6, any corporation operating on a cooperative basis, which is engaged in furnishing electric energy to persons in rural areas. So in theory, every organization either fits into bucket 1, 6418 or 6417 in theory, but there could be some things that do fall through the cracks. And it would really depend on how the entity is set up and its exact makeup. So I don't have a direct answer for you, but I think in general, the intention was you should either be able to take from column A or take from column B. I think that was the intent. Whether they actually wrote all the words properly to allow for that, there is a possibility that there are certain types of entities. Obviously, federal government falls through the cracks. So federal projects definitely fall through the cracks, but whether some other ones like the one you just mentioned would fall through the crack, I'm not 100% sure, and I apologize for not having an answer for you.
Got another question, Jacob, and I think you will address this a little bit later, but I'm going to ask it now. Can you please walk through an example of how a tax-paying entity can qualify for a 70% credit on solar installation? Would the investor own the utility? Would the investor-owned utility be eligible for up to 70%?
Sure. So we're going to answer that in the next couple of slides. So that was a great tee up for those next.
Okay, great.
So as I said, it's like an infomercial, but wait, there's more. So the first bonus we have is the 5-time bonus. So remember, this is a 6% credit. The only way you get up to the 30% is if you qualify for the 5-time bonus. And there's 3 ways to qualify for the 5-time bonus. It's an or, it's not an and. Any one of these will allow you to qualify for the 5-time bonus. So the first way you qualify for the 5-time bonus is the net output is less than 1 megawatt. Now, obviously 1 megawatt makes a lot of sense for CHP, for solar, for wind, but it doesn't make as much sense for like ground source heat pump, for example. So we did some math. We're not 100% sure, but we're pretty confident that 1 megawatt is the equivalent of 284 tons when we're talking about ground source heat pump. So if your project is quote unquote small, below 1 megawatt or below 284 tons, you get the 5-time bonus. If you're not small, if you're larger than that, then to qualify for the 5-time bonus, you must meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. Now, prevailing wage, a lot of people have a somewhat understanding or at least have a feel for what that is. And most jurisdictions in the country, the Department of Labor, along with the jurisdiction, have come up with what the prevailing wage is for an electrician 1, for a laborer, for all sorts of different categories. You will, obviously there's going to be guidance that comes out afterwards, hopefully shortly. And that guidance will tell us exactly what you need to do to prove that you're prevailing wage. But you do have a sense that all the installers for your project have to be at prevailing wage or higher in order to qualify for if you're a big project. So if you're a small project, you don't need to meet prevailing wage. But if you're a big project, you need to meet prevailing wage and you have to meet apprenticeship. We're going to talk about the apprenticeship requirement at the end of the presentation. There's not a lot of detail on that. But obviously there's going to be more guidance, but you have to meet both. You have to meet prevailing wage and meet the apprenticeship requirement. And we'll talk about that apprenticeship requirement at the end of the presentation. I did say there's 3 ways to qualify for the 5-time bonus. The third way is if you've started your project before they came out with the guidance for prevailing wage and apprentice, and to date they have not. And then you can add 60 days from the date that they do come out with the guidance. If you start your project in that window, then you qualify for the 5-time bonus as well. So pretty much any project started now is eligible for the 5-time bonus because there has not been guidance yet. So it doesn't matter if you're big or small, because there's no guidance, all projects qualify for the 5-time bonus until that guidance does come out. So wait, there's more. There's my infomercial. There's a domestic content bonus. And so to qualify for the domestic content bonus, 40% of the cost of steel, iron, or manufactured product, it has to be produced in the USA. And technically it's a 2% bonus. So it takes your 6% credit and makes it an 8% credit. Now, if you happen to meet the 5-time bonus as well, you get to multiply that 2% by 5 as well. So the 2 times 5 is 10. So your 30% goes to 40%. Now, what I'll tell you is not a lot of solar manufacturers are made in the USA. Although what I'll tell you is the second the IRA come out, I see press release after press release from foreign solar manufacturers saying, oh, we're building a plant in so-and-so in the United States. So there's going to be a lot more US made solar. And so there'll be more that will qualify for that domestic. But in general, most solar is Asian. And so, but that being said, lots of ground source heat pump manufacturers, lots of CHP, lots of thermal storage. Those technologies, a lot of them are produced in the United States. And so it could be quite straightforward to get a 40% credit for those technologies. Your ground source heat pump, your CHP, your thermal storage, you could find yourself at a 40% credit. Now, the amazing part there is thermal storage, before 2023, thermal storage had a 0% credit. So there was no credit for thermal storage. So if you were able to sell thermal storage with a 0% credit, imagine what you could do with a 40% credit. So it's really gonna blow out the sales for things like thermal storage. Ground source heat pump used to have a 10% credit. It'll be quite straightforward to get a 40% credit. CHP used to have a 10%. Now you can sell it with a 40% credit. So I think CHP and ground source heat pump will be a lot easier to sell with a 40% credit than back when it only had 10% credits.
Jacob, got another question. Is
Sure.
battery storage eligible for any of these credits?
Yes. So I don't go into a lot of detail, but you'll notice standalone energy storage systems starting in 2023 will also be eligible for these credits. So battery storage is directly in the legislation. And to the extent this person, and by the way, anybody that wants copies of these slides, you'll see my email about on the bottom here, jacob.goldman@energytaxsavers.com. Don't hesitate to shoot me an email asking for the slides. And if you have a specific question like that, I could get you the excerpt. Just ask me for the exact excerpt for how they define standalone energy storage. Because each one of these things, and I'm only going to go over some of them, each one of them have some specific definitions, and I can send you what the specific definitions are for battery storage. Okay. But wait, there's more. So now we have the energy community bonus. So I sometimes call this the Joe Manchin bonus because you'll see down here these census tract ones. So if you're in a census tract or adjoining census tract where a coal mine was closed since 2000, you could picture a lot of West Virginia, maybe Kentucky, a few other states have coal mines. So if your location that you're doing your project is in the census tract where there was a coal mine that was closed since 2000, or you're in one of the adjoining census tract, just the ones around it, you'll also get this energy community bonus. So once again, the bonus is a 2% bonus, but if you meet the 5-time bonus, 2 times 5 is 10. So now your 30% could be 40, and if you meet domestic, could be 50. So you could get up to 50% on energy community if you meet this. So the other one that's interesting is this census tract or adjoining census tract where a coal-fired plant was closed since 2010. Now, on these slides here, and if you ask for the slide, so first of all, this slide is just indicating, I thought a census tract was a big area. It's not necessarily big. It's somewhat defined by how many people are in it. So this is an area in Indiana. You can see that their census tracts are not as large as you'd want them to be. So for example, if the coal mine was in census tract 5, census tract 4, 37, 3702, 9, 8, and 6, they would all qualify because they're the adjoining census tract. But to find the coal plants, you can go to this website here. And I'm not going to stay on these slides very long. But if you ask for the slides, you can get all this web address information. And this will help you to figure out which coal plants were closed and when they were closed. And then if you want to do coal mines, you go to this website. Now, for coal mines, I had to do two things. I had to look at the coal mines that were active in 2001 and the coal mines that were inactive at the last date, or active at the last date. And then I looked at the difference. The difference was which were the ones were closed. So that's kind of how that worked out. There's some other weird energy community stuff here.
Jacob, got two questions for you real quick.
Sure.
This is sort of going back to your previous slides. Any project eligible over 1 megawatt?
Yes. So if the project is greater than 1 megawatt, to qualify, you have to meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship.
Okay.
So big projects have to meet this prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirement. Small projects do not have to meet it. Big projects do. It's an or. So it's one of these three. And then any project started before they come out with the guidance, which they haven't come out with yet. Any project that was started before that will be allowed to get the 5-time bonus.
Okay, then we have, how is a brownfield site defined for these incentives?
Yeah, I if you shoot me an email with that question, I'll give you the current definition. But you got to remember, this is tax law, and basically what the tax law says is, hey, you IRS Treasury, give us all the guidance. So you'll have like a little blurb. It'll say like brownfield as defined by such and such. But it's going to be guidance that comes out afterwards that are going to fully define these things. So if you shoot me an email, I'll give you what the tax law actually has in it at this point. But it's going to get a lot bigger. The guidance, once the guidance comes out, it's going to be a lot bigger. But the other two that I want to point out is these ones, and I have no idea how to calculate these. So I'm hoping at some point the IRS is just going to hand us a map. So it says area with 0.17% direct employment related to coal, oil, or natural gas, and higher than average unemployment. So you first have to have higher than average unemployment in that area, and then 0.17% of the direct employment has to be coal, oil, natural gas. I don't know how to find that. The next one's just as confusing. 25% of the area's tax revenue comes from coal, oil, or natural gas, and once again, has higher than average unemployment. I am hoping they just hand us a map, but that might be wishful thinking. I don't know how to define these areas. I'm hoping somebody out there knows how to define these areas.
We have one other question, Jacob. Asking if there was any closed coal plants in Iowa, and I assume just they should refer to that table that you provided.
Yeah, so if you shoot me an email to ask for the slides, you can go to this website. This is just a sampling of from an old presentation I made. If you go to this website, you can I'm not telling you it's easy to do. It's like downloading a big zip file. Oh, so that's coal plants. Were they asking for coal mines or coal plants?
Coal plants.
Okay, coal plants. Yeah, so you got to go to the right file in the zip file, and you'll be able to find all the coal plants that existed. You might have to look at the 2010 data and compare it to the current data to find where there's a delta. It's not exactly straightforward, but this was the only place I was able to find at least at minimum a listing of the plants.
Okay, thank you. And the slides will be on our website.
Just so you're aware, I did change the slides after I sent them to you fairly significantly. So I'll resend them to you, but also don't hesitate to shoot me an email and I'd be glad to send them out to you directly.
Okay.
But wait, there's more. So here we have the low income, the low income incentive bonus. So if you're doing a project in a low income community, so and I believe it's defined as 20% of the area is below the poverty line, then that project gets this 10% bonus for 2023 and 2024. It is not listed, just so you're aware, it is not listed as a 2%, and 2 times 5 equals 10. It is listed as a 10. So if you start at a 6% base, you could get a 16% credit if you don't meet all the other things, if you're building, if your project is in a low income community or on Indian land, it's a direct 10% benefit. And then if you're a qualified low-income residential building or a qualified low-income economic benefit project, then it's a 20% bonus. But these two bonuses, just this low-income bonus, it is only available for solar and wind. So it's important to know that the low-income bonus is only available for solar and wind. It is not available for the other technologies, only for solar and wind. And once, by the way, that low-income community is census tract based. So it is the census tract that defines whether in that census tract it is a low-income community. So here's those bonuses. Hopefully we've highlighted how the 70% for solar works, but I'll just do it again. You start at your 6% base credit. If you get the 5-time bonus, then you go up to 30%. If you're at the 5-time bonus and your equipment is US, you're now getting another 10%, you're at 40. If you located in an energy community, you're up to 50. And then if you put it in, back here, if you put it into the low income, qualified low income residential or qualified low income economic, if you put it on one of those projects, you get the 20, that gets you up to the 70% credit. So hopefully that answers the question that somebody had on the 70% credit. Once again, I highlight a couple technologies and we'll go into those technologies in specific. So ground source heat pump, only some of the property qualifies. So typically what qualifies is the bore field and the heat pump itself. That's the equipment, the installation, the design, that's the expense for all those items. You get that base credit. And if you qualify for the other bonuses, you get the bonus credit for those items. The question that always comes up is the downstream items, the items downstream from that. So those downstream items, it depends. And this is a tax interpretation. That tax interpretation is based on something in some old regulations for a different technology, section 148-9C10 IV. And there's some examples in VI, just so you're aware. And that interpretation basically says if downstream of the heat pump, if the energy on an annual basis comes from the heat pump, more than 75% of that energy comes from the heat pump, that equipment can take a credit. That equipment is credit eligible up to the percentage of its usage that comes from the heat pump. So a lot of times on a ground source heat pump, there's like a backup boiler. So if the backup boiler provides 26% of the annual energy for the building, then none of the downstream equipment qualifies if it's using, both streams, boiler and ground source heat pump. But if it only provides 20%, then you can take 80% of the downstream. And what do I mean by downstream equipment? I mean pipes that would be used by the boiler and the ground source, ductwork that uses the boiler and the ground source heat pump, heat exchanger that uses both, diffuser that uses both. To the extent a pipe is solely hooked to the ground source heat pump, that pipe qualifies as 100% ground source heat pump. It's only where there's a dual use, where there's dual usage through that conduit. Like for example, a diffuser might have dual use if you're blowing boiler energy into the room. And so that's where that 75% comes from. The boiler itself does not qualify. So items that do not use the ground source energy do not qualify. So if you have a conventional boiler, you get 0% of that because it's not using the ground at all. Now, ground source heat pump is the only technology that got extension all the way out to 1135 for construction beginning before 1135. Every other one is construction beginning before 1125, 10 years earlier, 1125. And so what that means is I wouldn't get too worried because I think Congress will extend it. They typically extend these things year in and year out. But ground source heat pump was, their lobbyists must have been really good because they got extension all the way out to 1135, not just 1125, like the other technologies. Thermal storage. So there is a little bit of controversy on what equipment constitutes thermal storage. So there are some rules in the bold there. It says directly connected to a heating, ventilation, or air conditioning system, which means that the thermal storage system is separate from the HVAC system. So maybe they mean just the tanks are eligible. But then it also says removes heat from or adds heat to a storage medium for subsequent use, which might mean that if you have a dedicated chiller, the dedicated chiller for the thermal storage might also be qualified. And then lastly, it provides energy for the heating or cooling of the interior of a residential or commercial building. So what it means is it's not for heating or cooling things other than buildings. So it does have to be thermal storage for a building as opposed to thermal storage for a process. So a lot of thermal storage has chillers, but the chillers cool the building directly, and then at nighttime they cool the tanks directly. If that's the case, those chillers more than likely will not be able to qualify. The only way they would is, I think it will probably go back to this, where was, I lost my place. It would probably go back to this 75% interpretation. So if the chiller is probably providing 75% of its energy to the tanks, it would qualify. But if it only is providing 50% of its energy to the tanks, it would probably not qualify as thermal storage property. And once again, that's only for construction beginning 1/1/25. So that is only 1/1/25. CHP, some of the interesting parts of CHP is one, if you're bigger than 50 megawatts, if you're a big CHP, it doesn't qualify anymore. So big CHP does not qualify. So it has to be smaller. And then anything bigger than 15 megawatts, there's a ratio that starts ratcheting down. So if you had 30 megawatts, so 15 divided by 30 would be 50%, that would be the haircut. You'd have to cut your credit by half for anything that was a 30 megawatt. So anything bigger than 15, there's a ratio that you have to use to start cutting your credit. CHP has to get 20% of its total useful energy for thermal and 20% of its useful energy for electric or mechanical, and overall efficiency has to be higher than 60%. So those are some of the things that are required for CHP to qualify. Now, the most interesting thing for CHP, which is not the case for thermal storage and ground source heat pump, it directly states in the law does not include property used to transport the energy source to the facility or to distribute energy produced by the facility. What that means is we're probably limited to the turbine, the boiler, maybe a heat exchanger, the pipes, and the design of all those pieces of equipment. But anything other than that, things that transport the gas to the facility, things that transport the steam or the electricity from the facility, those things don't qualify. So the design of those things and the cost of those items will not qualify. Once again, that's just for CHP. Ground source heat pump, they don't have that clause. Thermal storage, they don't have that clause. Microgrid, so the key with microgrid is that it's not part of the grid. So it's not bulk power systems. It's not part of the bulk power system. It is independent from the grid. It can be disconnected from the grid, and it qualifies as long as it's bigger than 4 kilowatts and smaller than 20 megawatts. And so it has to be connected to the grid, but it has to be separate from the grid and independent from the grid. And so this is not for putting in grid type equipment. This is for having an independent microgrid where you qualify. So we're about to move off of alternative energy. Does anybody have any other questions related to the alternative energy credits before we move on to some other techniques and other things for other tax incentives available for energy projects?
Jacob, at this time, there are no questions in the queue.
Okay. So, so this dovetails nicely with the alternative energy because It just so happens that if you're alternative energy property, you qualify as energy property, which is 5-year makers. 5-year makers means you get to depreciate the asset over 5 years. You take a deduction on your tax return each year for 5 years in an appropriate amount. And makers, I never remember what it means. It's like modified, accelerated, and I don't remember the rest. If somebody really needs to know, they can shoot me an email and I'll get you the full names for the acronym makers. But it basically is deciding how the item is depreciated over those 5 years. The interesting part with alternative energy, with all the items that we talked about before, oftentimes you would think that if you get a credit, you got to reduce your tax basis by the amount of the credit. That's not actually true. You only have to reduce the tax basis by half the credit. So 50% of the amount of the credit that you take. So you're kind of getting to depreciate an asset twice for a portion of it. So if you got a 30% credit, you'd be able to depreciate 15% of the project kind of a second time in a way. So it is a little bit of like double dipping, and it's definitely allowed. The other great thing that happens when you qualify for 5-year makers is you qualify for bonus depreciation. And so, in 2022, we're what's called 100% bonus. You can expense the entire project. We're going to talk on the next slide about time value of money, and you'll see why it's advantageous to move things up to an immediate deduction as compared to depreciating it over time. But if you place the project in service in 2022, you get 100% bonus. In 2023, it drops down to 80%. So 20% you depreciate the normal way, 80% you depreciate quickly. 60% in 2024, 40% in 2025, and 20% in 2026, and then 0 after that. Now, we do think Congress is going to change this at some future date. They might not change it for 2023, but they definitely like the accelerated depreciation. But bonus is only available for property that is depreciated 20 years or less. And so alternative energy is 5 years, 5 is less than 20, so it qualifies. But your conventional equipment, if you put a conventional chiller on a building or a package unit on a building, that would be considered 39-year property. 39-year property wouldn't necessarily typically qualify on a new construction basis, but on a retrofit, it turns out there's other ways to qualify it. There's something called a qualified improvement property. Qualified improvement property would qualify as 15-year property. And so it turns out that same package unit on the roof magically turns into qualified improvement property on a retrofit and then would be eligible for bonus. But if you put it on a new building, it doesn't qualify because it's not an improvement property. So the tax law is definitely convoluted and weird, if any of you have ever filed a 1040 would know, and it continues to be weird as it relates to how to depreciate assets. So time value of money. So typically things are building assets, as I mentioned. So you depreciate it 1/39th a year for 39 years. So in this example, I took a nice, easy $39,000 project. You would deduct that $1,000 a year for 39 years if it was 39-year property at a 35% tax rate. 1,000 times 35% would be $350 in tax in value in your pocket, but you're getting it over time. And if you, with time value money, $1 today is worth a lot more than $1 in the future. We traditionally use the 4% discount rate, which would mean that stream of 350s out for 39 years would be equivalent to $6,854. I did show it to you as an 8% discount rate. The reason being, we're currently running at an 8% inflation rate. So if you're not discounting by that amount, you're actually harming yourself. And so at an 8% discount rate, that's $4,158 in value. You drop, almost a third, if not more than a third in value, just by changing the discount rate from 4% to 8%, as you see there. 5-year depreciation, that 5-year makers, the value of that 5-year stream is worth $12,252. You almost double, and if you're using 8%, you're tripling the value of the incentive by moving it to 5-year. So if you do alternative energy instead of conventional, you're moving it to 5 instead of 39. That's tremendous value that you do. But on top of that, you could move to immediate. So 179D, which we're about to talk about, and also the bonus depreciation moves it to immediate. That gives you $13,650 in value. Comparing that to these other options, it's way better to get it immediate than to get it over time. So that's giving you a sense of the value of getting the money immediately, as opposed to getting it over 5 years or getting it over 39 years. Money now is worth more than money in the future. It's that time value of money concept. By the way, if anybody wants the spreadsheet that calculates all this, don't hesitate to shoot me an email asking for the spreadsheet. I'd be glad to provide you the spreadsheet that shows all the Excel formulas that allow for this calculation. Any questions before we move on? We're going to move on to 179D, our almost last topic.
Jacob, there are no questions in the queue.
Okay, so 179D has been around since 2006. For your commercial buildings, it moves and it does that, just like I was saying here. What is 179D? It moves 39-year property to immediate. It's the 6,800 versus 13,000, or it's the 4,000 versus 13,000. That's what 179D does for commercial building owners. So that's very powerful legislation. If you're not commercial, if you were government in the traditional one, the designer got that benefit. That was just money that came out of thin air, the designer getting the benefit. But it was always usually the smallest benefit. We always called it like layering the cake. So the cake itself was the energy savings. The frosting was utility rebates. 179D was kind of like the cherry on top, the little extra bonus that you get for being energy efficient. So since 2006, we've done 16,000 buildings in getting this incentive. You can actually go back. Back in 2011, they came up with the rules for commercial building owners to go back. And so using what's called a change of accounting, you can go back currently and get all your projects between 2006 and the present and get that tax deduction that you might have forgotten to get. That is not available for designers of government buildings. It is only available for the commercial building owner. Designers of government buildings can only go back 3 years. But a lot of stuff has changed. So 179D did a dramatic change in this Inflation Reduction Act. This slide highlights some of those changes. The changes only go into effect for projects placed in service in 2023. So your projects that completed in 2022, they use all the old rules, but the projects that place in service in 2023, they can only use these new rules. So the first thing that has changed is designers not only can get the benefit for government buildings, they can get it for not-for-profits, they can get it for instrumentalities, and they can get it for Indian tribal governments. So they've increased the designer benefit. So the designers get the benefit. And by the way, the only party that can qualify for this is the designer. If it's a government building, if it's a not-for-profit building, it's an instrumentality, if it's an Indian tribal. They're the only party eligible to get the incentive, is the government, is the designer, sorry. The deduction levels have changed. So in some cases, the deduction went down. So the old deduction used to be $1.80 per square foot. In some cases, that might go down to $1 per square foot. So the new range is, the base range is 50 cents to $1. And once again, you see that 5-time bonus. But this time, the only way to qualify for the 5-time bonus is projects meeting prevailing wage and apprenticeship. You do not have the option of a small project. So the only way you get the 5-time bonus to change your 50 cents to $2.50 and your $1 to $5 is by meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirement. The way you qualify has changed a little bit. You used to qualify, you could individually qualify for lighting, HVAC, envelope. Now it's more holistic. It's the whole building. It's the entire building. And so at a 25% overall energy improvement compared to a standard, you get the minimum deduction. That's the 50 cents or the 250. At a 50% reduction compared to the standard, you get the $1 or the $5. How do you get those? That's through modeling is one way to do it. Through energy simulation modeling against ASHRAE 90.1. You can model your building. If you can show that at 25% improvement, you get the minimum, 50%, you get the maximum. For retrofits and retrofits only, you can qualify using EUI, so energy use intensity. I don't know if you're familiar with Portfolio Manager, Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but it's a way of calculating your EUI. You basically calculate your EUI before your project, you calculate your EUI after your project. That's where you have to show the 25 to 50% improvement. Wherever you fall will define what your tax deduction is. So for retrofits and retrofits only, you can use the EUI method. If you have new construction, you have to use the modeling method. And if you have a retrofit, you can do EUI or the modeling method. But new construction cannot use the EUI method. And then it used to be that you could only take the tax deduction once for the life of the building. So now there's a re-up, a reset. So for commercial buildings, every 3 years, you can take the deduction again for a new project. For tax exempt buildings, every 4 years. So what that means is if you're a commercial building that did a project back in 2019, 3 years from the date that you did that project, if you complete another project, that new project can qualify all over again. Actually, that's not true because it has to be in 2023. So 2019, would allow you in 2023, if you finish a project, you would be able to get that new tax deduction all over again. 4 years for tax exempt buildings. So what's the math look like? So the maximum is on a 100,000 square foot building, you could get $500,000 deduction, for example. Picture a K through 12 middle school. If you're the designer of that middle school and you put in ground source heat pump and LEDs, for example, that project could qualify you as designer for a $500,000 tax deduction. We have a lot of designers that all they do is design K through 12 schools. They haven't paid any income taxes since 2006. They wiped out their entire income tax liability since 2006. So it's incredibly powerful for designers of tax exempt organizations. What do I mean by tax exempt? So on the government side, we're talking offices, military bases, courthouses, post offices. On the state side, same thing, state universities, county, city, town. We're talking, by far K through 12 public schools is the most that we do. But now added to that for the designer is not-for-profits. 50% of all hospitals are not-for-profits. Churches, private universities. The designer can now get the benefit for those projects. And then tribal governments, shopping plazas, hotels, offices, casinos. Excuse me. The designer can get those benefits for designing energy efficiently for those projects.
Jacob, we got a question. If you are between 25 and 50%, is there a sliding scale, or must you reach 50% to get any more than the 50 cents to $1?
Great question. I apologize for not mentioning it. It is a sliding scale. So if you're 26%, they do an actual calculation. Obviously, the calculation is easy for $2.50 to $5. It's $2.60 that you would qualify for. So absolutely, yes, there is a sliding scale between the $2.50 and the $5, or between the 50 cents and the $1. So apologize for not making that clear first time around. So to qualify, you need two things. You need a project that is in one of the technologies. It has to be related to lighting, HVAC, or envelope. So new construction obviously has lighting, HVAC, and an envelope, but the retrofit project has to be a lighting, HVAC, or envelope project. And then you have to meet an ASHRAE standard. Now, we don't know what that standard is going to be. And actually, it appears that I haven't updated this slide to my most recent information. So by the way, if people send me an email, I will update this slide to reflect what I'm saying as opposed to what's on the screen here. And therefore, you'll have the most updated information if you shoot me an email and ask for these slides. So for projects placed in service between 2006 and 2015, it's ASHRAE 2001 that we compare against. And you can still go back. If you did a project in this time period, you can still go back and get a tax deduction for those commercial projects. It is ASHRAE 2007, likely through the end of this year, but we think we're probably 85% confident that it is going to remain ASHRAE 2007 for the next 4 years. So all the way through 2026, we believe it is going to be ASHRAE 2007 all the way out to 2026, and only in 2027. And so that's why this is marked slightly incorrectly. And I will fix this for you. We believe that only in 2027 will it move to ASHRAE 2016 or 2019. So an important difference than what is marked here. So it's ASHRAE 2007 through the rest of this year, and we believe all the way to 26. And when I say we, I mean parties that would typically not want it to be ASHRAE 2007. In their comments, the IRS said, we know it's going to be ASHRAE 2007 all the way to 26, so we want you to act soon in changing it for ASHRAE for 2027. So we think there's pretty good consensus out there that IRS is going to make it ASHRAE 2007 for the next all the way out to 2026. And so that's really important information to know. And then obviously for retrofits, you also have the second opportunity to use EUI, Energy Utilization Index, to qualify. So what technologies tend to qualify on the HVAC side? And once again, I bolded a couple. So geothermal, thermal storage, and combined heat and power tend to qualify. These other technologies also tend to qualify. What I'll tell you is it's often an aspect of knowing what's in ASHRAE and doing something different. So for example, in ASHRAE for rental apartments, dorms, and hotels, ASHRAE has PTAC units. So if you have a centralized system, if you have a central plant for these type buildings, you're probably going to qualify. If you put in VRF in these type buildings, you're probably going to qualify. So it's really doing something different than what's in the reference standard. The reference standard, for example, these type of buildings is PTAC units. So if you do something different, you'll probably qualify. Ground source heat pump, we think might be one of the few technologies, maybe thermal storage, maybe combined heat and power. They'll be part of the few technologies that will be able to still qualify when we go to ASHRAE 2019. 2019 is hard to beat by 25 to 50%. We did some initial analysis. We looked at buildings that would qualify against 2007. And if you had 100 buildings that qualified against 2007, only 10 of them will likely qualify against 2019. So the amount of buildings that will qualify will dramatically drop once we switch over to 2019. So where's 170 tend to work? Designers of tax exempt buildings, new construction, and then the last one's a little complicated. It's retrofits where they have some asset already sitting on their books, like a roof, for example, sitting on their 39-year property books. So we can use the new 179D to apply it against the old roof, for example. So kind of a higher level analysis there. But clearly tax exempt buildings for the designer and then new construction will oftentimes qualify against ASHRAE 2007. You need to have data to qualify for 179D. So the ideal data is, as built architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, comm check, lighting envelope, HVAC and hot water comm check, and then lighting and HVAC spec sheets. all the submittals for the lighting in the HVAC system. If we can't get the ideal, once again, we have to run an energy simulation model. For those of you who have run those, you need a lot of data. So to the extent that you don't have some of these, any plans that you do have would be what you would need to send. And then you'd want things like lighting surveys, an HVAC unit schedule, mechanical plans, so you know what spaces are served, any sort of drawings that you have would be important in order to run that energy simulation model.
Jacob, we got a question.
Okay.
Is this for new installations only? Or for example, if there is an existing geothermal system but needs to have the heat pumps replaced, would those qualify?
So that project would qualify the building. If you send me that question, you would send that question to me by email. I would reply back that we should probably have a phone call because it's a little bit of a longer topic. So technically it would qualify, but because there's other ways to hasten the depreciation of that asset, you'd have to find other assets to apply 179D against, is the short answer. But if you want the long answer, shoot me an email and I'd be glad to just remind me to set up a call with you to give you the long answer. 179D, you're typically going to need a service provider. You're going to want to make sure they review your projects on a complimentary basis, that they do all your calculations and modeling, that the study contains everything the IRS requires, that they'll interface with your tax department, and that they'll provide you with audit assistance in the event of an audit. That's what you'd want out of a good 179D provider. To just highlight some of the differences between old 179D and upcoming 2023, the max deduction in 2022 is $1.88. It goes to $5, but now you have that prevailing wage aspect to it. You could qualify on individual systems in the old one. Now it's more holistically, it's the whole building holistically, 25 to 50. Designers could only be eligible for government. Now they're eligible for both government and nonprofits and tribal governments. You could only take the deduction once for the lifetime of the building. Now you get a reset on a commercial every 3 years and every 4 years for tax exempt. You had to beat ASHRAE 2007. We do think it'll be ASHRAE 2007 all the way out to 2026. And now you also have this other retrofit technique for qualifying. So that ends with the 179D. The last topic is this brief presentation on apprenticeship. We don't know exactly how this is going to work. There is going to be guidance. IRS does seem to say that this guidance is going to probably be the earlier guidance. So could be the end of the year, could be early next year that they're going to come out with this apprenticeship guidance. But what we get from the law itself is if you started your project before 2023, 10% of the labor hours will have to be apprentices. In 2023, if you start your project, 12.5% of your labor hours will have to be apprentices. And then after 23, it'll go to it'll settle in at the 15% of total labor hours will be from apprentices. If you have more than 4 people working on a job, at least one of them has to be an apprentice. And the apprentice has to come from a registered apprenticeship program. And that's defined in this section 3131E3B. That apprentice has to come. Now, there is some aspects of a good faith effort. So to the extent you put a good faith effort in getting an apprentice and the registered apprenticeship program was unable to provide you with an apprentice, in those cases, if you put in a good faith effort, you do not need to meet the requirement. The good faith effort covers you for the requirement. Now, obviously, they haven't come out with the guidance on what a good faith effort is. So once they come out with the guidance, they'll tell you what hoops you need to jump through to try to get an apprentice. And once you've jumped through those, you can go with no apprentices, for example. But you do have to have a good faith effort. We help on 179D. It's just about our company. We have attorneys, CPAs, MBAs, lead AP, enrolled agents. We write a lot of articles, and we'd be happy to assist you with either alternative energy items or 179D. This is my contact information. If you want a copy of the slides, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I'll be glad to provide you with a copy of the slides. Unless there's questions, and I'll stick around for a little bit for questions, I don't have any additional material.
Okay. All right. So at this time, if you have any questions for Jacob, please put them in the question and answer section. We'll give it a minute here. Jacob, I just want to thank you for that great presentation, very informative and very detailed. So that will be very useful for going forward, and hopefully we'll get some more information from the federal government on how they're actually going to enact it, and so a little bit more policy on some of the details. Okay,
Yeah, some of the other AEE chapters I've presented to have suggested maybe setting something up 6 to 8 months from now, when hopefully all the guidance has come out, and then maybe refreshing it. But I'd be glad to do that for your chapter as well.
Okay, that'd be great. Do you have a question come in? Anything with RNG as far as digesters go? Very good question. Digesters.
So RNG I'm kind of lost.
RNG stands for renewable gas, and I'm assuming this speaker's talking about biodigestion facilities where they take manure or food waste and they turn it into methane, and they use that gas for on-site, or they put it into the natural gas line.
Yeah, so to the extent you're using bio waste to create electricity, there is an incentive for that. So if you're directly making electricity, I think unfortunately, they put the words electricity in there. And so to the extent that you're only making the gas, or you're using that gas to create heat, steam, or to heat and cool a building or something like that, unfortunately, I think that's left off the table, because, and to the extent somebody could send me a specific example by email, I'd be glad to answer it. But I have gotten some questions in this area already, and my research showed that they do have an incentive called bio waste, but that bio waste specifically says it has to produce electricity. So it's not just producing gas or producing a thermal energy. It has to produce electricity for it to qualify.
So if it was producing electricity on site and being used on site, would that count?
Yes, that would count.
Would it also then account if they're creating electricity and putting it back into the network?
Yeah, I believe that would count as well.
Okay.
And then all these incentive, where's that list? The same 6%, it would grow up from there.
Any more questions for Jacob? Seeing none, I'd like to thank Jacob for a great overview of the IRA. I hope all the participants found the webinar educational, and please look for notifications on future energy assistance webinars from the IWRC and the IAEE. Jacob, I think it's a great idea to have you come back here this spring and give an update and maybe an overview of what policies has come out from the federal government on the IRA.
I'd be glad to do it.
Thank you so much. For the participants, we will be posting the most up-to-date slides of the presentation on the IWRC website in the next couple of days, and we will be sending you a very short evaluation. So if you could take a minute to complete the evaluation, we really would appreciate it. Seeing no other, oh wait, we got one more question come in. Under RFG, would a purchase agreement for the gas used for electric count?
So first of all, anytime there's power purchase agreement, you typically don't use section 48. You don't use the ITC. You use the, what is it called? PTC, production tax credit. But once again, you're not, in this example, you're not producing electricity, you're producing gas. And unfortunately, I'm not an expert on, and just to give you some guidance, section 45 is the section that you'd be interested in. So section 45 is the PTC, production tax credit. And I do think the production tax credit is only interested in electricity production. So I have a feeling, and once again, I'm not an expert in this particular area, but I have a feeling that it would be unfortunate, but it's left off the table. And by the way, when things that make sense for, all the things you're describing absolutely make sense for a tax credit. The technique is, you think you can't talk to your congresspeople and your senators, you actually can reach out to them and tell them, you guys messed up. You left this technology off the table. You should remedy it. And they are very receptive to it. So I would not hesitate to reach out, but it is I believe the PTC is very much interested in electricity production. And so it would also possibly fall through the cracks as an eligible project.
Okay. Again, these slides will be up here on the website in a couple of days. We'll have Jacob's contact information. But if you have a question that you just can't wait, you can email me at the IWRC and I can forward it to Jacob. But also his contact information is there listed at the bottom of this slide. Seeing no more questions, again, I'd like to thank Jacob for a great presentation. We really do appreciate this information. Oh, we got another, just when we're about to end, we get another question, but that's okay. Oh, what is the IWRC website? It's iwrc.org. So I think we are a little bit past our hour, but it was a great information, and we'll sign off and everybody have a good day. And again, Jacob, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.